Spire 2 is a game that is designed around player choice and control. Every combat, card choice, shop, event, and even the route you take through these encounters is almost entirely up to the player. Sure, there is a lot of luck involved, this is a roguelike after all, but you have so much agency in how you play and the way you choose to build your deck. But what happens when you take that element of choice away and strip the player of their ability to choose these things? What would happen if you locked every card reward, event choice, and ancient encounter behind the spin of a wheel? The rules for this challenge are pretty simple. I have 3 wheels, 1 for my card rewards after each combat, and 2 for choice options from events and the ancients at the start of each act. To keep things simple, and also winnable without incredible amounts of RNG, I am still allowing myself to choose purchases at shops and to choose between my options at rest stops. Since shops have so many options and money is also a factor, I chose to keep those open, and as for rest stops, I just didn't think about it. I also chose to play a random character each run since it felt like it was in the spirit of the challenge to do so, but that was less of a rule and more of a suggestion. With the rules out of the way, I started my first run as the Ironclad. My first combat encounter went pretty well, and I hit my first wheel spin of the challenge. I'm sure that doesn't bode poorly for the rest of the challenge, right? After a couple of encounters and a moment of beautiful artistry, I take some event encounters, get hit with sticks in exchange for getting my money up, and take my first elite encounter of the run. After getting completely de-atomized on my first turn, I luckily pulled it back and made my way to our first boss, the Kin. I did not win. I didn't really get to steer my deck in any direction here, and I didn't have any meaningful damage or block cards yet. This wasn't a great sign of what was to come, but I was still hopeful for the future. Next run, I rolled the Ironclad again, and I was finding myself into a little bit of a vulnerability build. I pulled a Dismantle pretty early, and that really supplemented my damage in the early game. After a generally pretty relaxed Underdogs run, I found myself fighting the Soulfish at the end of Act 1. This fight is pretty easy, and with a solid deck for this early on considering my restrictions, the fight was over by turn 7. I pulled a Thrash card for my boss reward this time, and I didn't know it yet, but these boss rewards would become a luxury as time went on. Going into Act 2, I got a bunch of wax relics from my ancient encounter and began making my way through the act. I was unfortunately forced to skip my first card reward, and then proceeded to hit 3 back-to-back random events in hopes I would get to pick up some new relics. No such thing happened, and I was then thrust into an encounter with one of my least favorite elites in Act 2, the Infested Prism. These things, despite appearances, have hands, and are one of the enemies I struggled with pretty consistently. They do quite a lot of damage and block pretty often. The only real advantage you have against them is their passive ability, which gives you an extra energy the first time you hit it each turn. After 8 turns and about 25 of my health though, it finally died, yielding me a tea set and no card. Damn. I got a Happy Flower from my relic chest, upgraded some cards, and hit up a shop with a fat 644 gold in my hands. I picked up a Shuriken, a Colossus card, and pulled some fluff out of my deck before heading through my last rest stop before the act boss, the Kaiser Crab. The Crab is a very hit or miss boss for me. On one hand, this boss has a ton of damage potential and can be a really big deal if you don't have much block, but on the other hand, the Crab is easily my best boss in the Act 2 boss pool. It acts really predictably, and it's not too hard to control the fight in your favor. Its main mechanic is this backstab buff, where the claw behind the player does boosted damage. This would be a bit of an issue if you couldn't just attack the other claw to turn it around. One claw also tends to do, like, no damage each turn, so you really only need to worry about one side of the fight for most of the time. Sometimes, the right claw will turn into a nuclear bomb and shoot at you, but this is counterbalanced by the rest turn it has to take after it does this. After one claw dies, the other gets a bajillion block and some strength, but this doesn't really matter since it's already on pretty low health. All of that isn't to say that this fight was easy. I ended it with about 15 health on a turn that would have killed me, but either way, that's Act 2 done. Can't wait to get my boss reward and never mind. Going into Act 3, the Ancient gave me Claws, which let me pick 6 cards to turn into Mauls. I took this opportunity to replace all of my strikes, and I felt pretty confident that this was gonna be a good run. I kept pushing through, had a couple of close calls, but I still felt confident I would be fine. All I had to do was push through a final elite encounter with 18 health. That's fine. I'm sure I'll get good draws and, well, this second run was really good, and I felt like this challenge would be smooth sailing from here on out. Oh, how naive I was. My second session had only 2 runs leave Act 1. I had a defect run that made it to the Knowledge Demon, but I barely got it below half health before I was killed. The Knowledge Demon was probably one of the most consistent run killers I had faced. If you have enough damage to kill it early, then the fight isn't a big deal. Most runs, though, aren't so lucky, and you'll end up stuck in a 20-turn stall where it keeps nerfing you and healing itself to the point where you can't even hit it. Eventually, I found a run with a Necrobinder that I thought might pull through, until I entered an event I had never seen before. This frankly giant knight was asking me for this key that I found on the ground. I could have either given it to him for 100 smackers, or I could have started a fight. The wheel unfortunately decided that today was not my day and forced me into the combat. I was dead in only 4 turns. The next day, I came back and started another run with the Ironclad. I had a pretty good build going. I picked up a bunch of zero-cost attacks like Anger and a Juggling Power, and I felt pretty confident about my damage. I cleared the Waterfall Giant and the Insatiable with ease, and I was back into Act 3 pretty quickly. Surely this would be the one, right? I mean, I have so much damage and a pretty good relic stack, so I'm pretty confident in my ability to make it out. Unfortunately though, much like my last good Ironclad run, it just wasn't meant to be. Just like last time, I had one final elite encounter before the last boss, this time against a Soul Nexus. This thing hits incredibly hard. Unfortunately, my deck was also kinda slim on block cards, and I just got chunked way too hard and died in 6 turns. A shame really, but if I'm dying here, then I'm not so sure I would have been much better off against the test subject. After a little bit of tomfoolery with the Regent and an admittedly really funny death to the Knowledge Demon as Necrobinder, I had finally randomized onto a character I still hadn't played for this challenge, the Silent. Spirits were really low at this point. I was 3 days into the challenge, and I had only had 2 runs even get to see the 3rd act of the game, much less the actual finale. With any luck though, the Silent would be the one to change that. Early on, I had already started to get a pretty solid build going, picking up a prepared card early on. Now, you might look at this and think, oh, draw and discard 1 card, that's not that good, which would be true for anyone else. However, the Silent is a little bit different. Many of her cards have a gimmick called Sly, which automatically plays the card if it is discarded during your turn. This means that with a card like Prepared, we can play extra cards with less energy spent and chain together a lot of actions in just 1 turn. Just a few encounters later, I pulled a Calculated Gamble, which discards my entire hand and redraws it. All I need now are Sly cards to take advantage of this, and surely the wheel will give me some, right? After a pretty close fight with the kin, I made it into Act 2. I received Pale's Legion during my visit with them, and started planning my path to the Kaiser Crab again. By this point in the challenge, I decided that maybe it's best I just don't take elite encounters. As much as the lack of relics isn't great, neither is dying horrifically in my attempts to get them, so I think I'll take my chances. This run netted me a shovel at least, so I could sacrifice some of my rest stops to pick up a relic if I was in any position to do so. My general plan was to hit as many non-combats going forward as I could, hitting chance events, shops, and rest stops as much as I can. Not only can this net me more relics, but it can also be good to skip combat encounters once I have a decent build. Since I can't really choose to skip cards, it's nice to be able to avoid bloating my deck without having to spend a fortune on card removals. Just after I passed the relic chest, I obtained a power from a chance event, Speedster. This card makes it so that every card I draw mid-turn deals 2 damage to every enemy on screen. This doesn't sound like a lot, but when my entire deck is centered around shuffling cards in and out of my hand as much as possible, it adds up very quickly. I found this just in time too, since I was about to go into the Kaiser Crab again as my boss for the act. I won't bore you with the details of this fight again. I drew about 10 Grillion cards and ended the fight with a crisp 6 HP remaining. I had a clear out plan for my Act 3, and from the way things were going at the start of the act, I had a pretty good shot of winning here. I was given a throwing axe in the ancient encounter, which double casts my first card of the combat. This can really make or break an encounter sometimes, like it did here, where my double speedster proc did so much damage that I cleared the encounter in one turn and with one attack. Unfortunately though, things started to falter just a little bit from here. I was forced to give up my bellows in a chance encounter for a vambrace, which kind of killed a lot of my first turn damage. After this, the oldest man I've ever seen took away my fish oil to upgrade my calculated gamble, which isn't actually a bad trade, but when I could have turned that vambrace into 2 new relics, I wasn't that happy about it. I got a gremlin horn and a happy flower after for some more energy economy, and at this point I thought things were really looking up again. Unfortunately, my next combat encounter would drop about 40 health off of my bar, but things could always be worse, I guess. My next shop gave me a pantograph, so I wasn't too worried about my health going into the boss at least. Then, a chance encounter made me cook up some bullshit, and I had to take a big mushroom, which essentially negates the silence passive of pulling extra cards turn 1 in exchange for a bit of max health. This doesn't sound too bad on paper, but so much of my strength right now is entirely reliant on me pulling speedster turn 1, so I wasn't too excited about having less chances to do so. After one last enemy encounter, I made it. I was at the final of Act 3 about to fight the test subject. I was so close to putting this run to bed, and I was in perfect shape to do so. Full HP and with Speedster and Serpent form both active early on, I was in such a good position to win this fight. The first phase was over by the end of turn 3, and I was feeling really good about my chances here. 3 turns later, and the second phase was dead too. I was getting really good hands, and as long as I could keep this up, I was on track to be through this challenge with the character I least expected. Unfortunately though, I'm sure you know that's not what happened. On turn 14, I made a misplay that cost me the entire fight. With 23 health remaining, I played a dodge and roll and an untouchable, bringing me to 13 block and 23 HP, into an attack worth 36. I was about to take my exact health and damage, and there was nothing I could do. Except, there was something I could have done. I didn't realize it in the moment, but if I had used the defend in my hand instead of the dodge and roll, I would have tanked with 1 health remaining. I can't know how the rest of that fight would have gone, but what I do know is that this misplay doubled my playtime for this challenge. Later that night, I was back on the Ironclad when I had my sole run that passed the Knowledge Demon. I had an incredibly strong vulnerability build using Cruelty, the Paper Frog, and Perfected Strikes, and I just brute forced my way through. Going into Act 3, I was forced to take an interesting relic. The Whispering Earring is one of the very few flat energy gain relics in the game, but the catch is that you literally don't get to play your first turn anymore. Instead, Vaku, the ancient who gave it to you, takes over and does some bullshit for a turn before handing control back off to you. He sort of just mashes cards from left to right with no reason behind it, which would have been fine if it weren't for another one of my relics, the Radiant Pearl, which gives me a Luminesce card at the start of each combat, which has Retain and gives you a bunch of energy and exhaust itself when played. Not being able to hold on to this, since it's conveniently always at the very start of my hand, really sucks, but at least I get a little bit more energy every turn to make up for it. Sometimes Vaku would kinda lock in and clear combats, but this was rare, and more often than not he would kinda cook me. Regardless, I pushed through Act 3 with a few rough encounters, and made it to the finale once again. This time, I was against the Doormaker, and you know what? I f***ing hate this boss. Without genuinely insane damage, this thing feels like it just doesn't die. Now, granted, I know it's had some reworks on the beta branch recently, but I don't really know what those entail, and for this fight, it was a complete blowout. I even had a lizard tail to give me a second shot at life, but I just couldn't do enough damage for the kill. I died here again, and while I was still sort of hopeful I could get here again after the silent run, this run just completely killed any enthusiasm I had left for this challenge. I played a few more runs and never hit Act 3 again before calling it quits for the night. The next day, I decided to change things up. You remember earlier when I said that the random characters thing was more of a suggestion? Today was the day I finally broke that rule. I love all the characters in this game. I think they have really cool stuff they can do. However, I'm a lot less excited to play them when I can't really choose to build towards the cool stuff. I found that Ironclad was consistent and was the best character for me to hit Act 3 with under these conditions without a miracle of RNG. So I stopped picking random and played only the Ironclad from here on out. I told myself that this would be the last day, because if it wasn't, then this video would have to be delayed and I couldn't let that happen. Starting the run, Niao gave me a strawberry. How nice of them. I would be up against the Soulfish again, so I wasn't too concerned with my endgame for this act. I just had to get a start. My first combat yielded me a setup strike, and my second gave me a Shrug It Off. I bought a second setup strike and a battle trance in my first shop, and a breakthrough from another encounter after that. Things were looking pretty good from here. I had some good damage going, a little bit of deck shuffling, and some good block, so things were looking up. I then reached a bridge where the wheel told me to hold on to my cards 5 times in a row, before finally conceding one of my setup strikes and about 20 health in total. Yikes. My next encounter gave me an Expect a Fight, which would be really good for my energy economy later on. The wheel, not knowing when to quit, then forced me to spend all of my money at the Endless Conveyor event, giving me an Unmovable, a Prolong, and an Ultimate Defend, and a little bit of health before kicking me out. I didn't know it yet, but this was the start of one of the strongest builds I have ever had. Going into Soulfish, I had quite a lot of block cards on my hands now. At one point in the fight, I had a little bit over 40 block, way overkill for this early in the game, but still, things were going well. Of course, I still managed to take about 40 damage throughout the fight, but the Soulfish left me with something that would guarantee that would never happen again. Barricade is a power that makes it so block doesn't expire. That's it. In conjunction with Unmovable though, and cards like Prolong, my block kinda just keeps going up. Forever. This build was only made stronger when I visited Pale again, who gave me Pale's Horn, a relic that adds 2 Relax cards to my deck. Relax gives me a nice chunk of block and buffs my next turn with extra cards and energy before exhausting. If I can pull my powers on turn 1 and a Relax on turn 2, the fight is basically already over. I kind of just get to stall forever without any concern of taking damage. Getting hands like this isn't guaranteed, of course, but there are ways we can make it easier. A few rooms later, I found this neat little book on the floor, which apparently contained the secrets to drawing 2 extra cards on power use. I'd use that to apply Swift to my Unmovable, giving me just a little bit more of a chance at pulling some of my stronger cards earlier. I then upgraded my Unmovable to lower its energy cost and found myself against a familiar face. The knight that killed my Necrobinder run a few days ago is back here again, and the wheel has decided that it's time for round 2. This time though, with my infinite block, he never got a meaningful hit in, and the fight was over in 8 turns. Winning this fight gave me a Lantern Key, a quest card that unlocks something. After that event, I upgraded my Barricade at a rest stop to lower its cost, meaning I can now afford to play both of my powers on turn 1. I pushed through a couple more combat encounters without taking any real damage, and found myself back at the Kaiser Crab for the 3rd time this video. This fight was definitely something. Just to flex the build a little bit, I used the Fortifier Potion pretty early on in the fight to triple my block, bringing me to an all-time high of 216 block in total. Was this even remotely necessary? No, not at all. I don't think I ever lost more than 50 block in a single turn, and in all honesty, I probably could have used that Fortifier better later in Act 3. Regardless, I killed the Kaiser Crab basically damageless and was on to Act 3. Faku was back to with me again, this time giving me a blood-soaked rose. This is another flat energy boost, which is welcome, but the cost is pretty annoying. It adds an Enthralled card to my deck, which is an unremovable 2-cost card that has to be played before anything else. Annoying, but at least I usually get more energy out of it. After my first combat encounter of the act, where I took a measly 2 damage, I felt pretty confident that I would keep the same momentum through until I reached the test subject at the finale. But the literal very next encounter reinstated the fear I've had every run thus far. I was against a devoted sculptor who gives itself a +9 strength buff every single turn. I stalled for a little bit too long and was left with 13 health on round 8, staring down the barrel of a 66 damage nuclear bomb. Thankfully, I killed it, but that fight served as a reminder that I can't get complacent just because I can stall super well right now. Then, still at 22 health and reeling from the sculptor, I found myself against a Globe Man, an enemy that deals 6 damage to you when you use a power. I, of course, don't have health to spare right now, so I have to be really careful playing these. Unfortunately, this fight takes me down even lower to a catastrophic 4 health at my lowest. After that nightmare of an encounter though, I finally got to find out what that key was for. I found this studious fellow locked in a cage with a bunch of books and such, but there was a chest nearby, and the wheel thought that that would be a better use of my key. So I popped it open to get 2 relics that aren't really good anymore and a regen potion. The smart guy called me a moral failure, but maybe he should have considered that molten egg is cool as hell before he got locked in the cage. After a couple of rest stops and that regen potion I got from the key, I was almost back up to full health again. One final combat encounter and I was back in the endgame. Fortunately, no elite is here to kill me again. And so I was able to pull through the final combat cleanly. I took my final rest stop to upgrade one of my relaxes, and I was on to fight the test subject. If any run was going to win, it would be this one. I even went as far as to write, "This is it" on the map, so it has to be true. Going into the finale, my nerves were pretty bad. A week of runs had gone into this, and I was not excited to be possibly heading back to Niao all over again. If this run of all runs couldn't make it, I didn't know what would. Going into the fight, I had an incredible starting hand with Unmovable and a Relax, so I had the perfect setup for my turn 2. Next turn, I pulled Barricade and started stacking block, and I also used a weak potion to make sure I wouldn't lose all of that block on hit. By turn 4, the first phase was over, and I took a free turn to stack a bit more block. I had an incredible setup going into the second phase, and after a few more turns and only 10 health loss, I was into phase 3. This phase is by far the longest part of the fight due to the subject's passive, Nemesis. During this phase, every other turn the boss goes intangible and only takes 1 damage per hit. This really stretches the fight out, which isn't great since now the boss is starting to do very heavy damage. This all came to a head at the end of turn 16, when I realized that I didn't draw enough block to tank the next hit. I couldn't believe it. It was over. Or at least, that's what should have happened. In order to get this video out on time, I made the executive decision to return to the title screen and restart the fight. I knew that this fight was winnable, I just didn't know the right route to play it. Does this invalidate the run? Maybe, but that doesn't matter anymore. This thing, I don't know what it is going to die, and I'm going to conquer this damned wheel. After a couple of attempts and maybe 20 minutes spent fighting this thing, I finally had a viable run. On turn 1, I played my Immovable just like the first attempt, only this time I saved my Relax and used a Shrug It Off and a Perfect Strike to get effectively just as much block while dealing about a quarter of the boss's health. I still pulled my Barricade next turn, so I activated that and cheaped out on block so I could get more damage off. On turn 3, I used an Inflame to gain strength and set up 21 block with Prolong so I could get a head start next turn. I tanked 22 damage from the boss, but on turn 4, I kill the first phase and stack up to 45 block. Turn 5, I'm up to 60 and deal a good chunk. I lose about half of my block, but I'm still feeling pretty safe. On turn 6, I finally pop my first Relax and a Cruelty so I can get a massive chunk of block and energy for the next turn. Next turn, I get my last Relax from a Shrug It Off proc and get the boss down to about half health. A few more turns of this, and on turn 9, I ended the second phase with 33 blocks stacked and 50 health remaining. This time, I still have my weak potion in my inventory, so I can tank any potentially lethal hits during third phase. From here, the fight is just a matter of keeping my block high enough to tank while getting chip damage in between intangibility turns. On turn 14, I finally use my weak potion to avoid a massive 47 damage attack, and at this point the test subject has about 2/3 of its health. Every chance I get, I stack more vulnerable on it so that when I get good damaging turns, I can make the most of them. The boss can still take debuffs during intangible turns, so even if I'm not dealing damage, I'm still making the most out of my time. On turn 20, I have a really close call, barely pulling enough block and taking a massive hit that leaves me at just 5 HP. I have one turn left to win, and I pulled the perfect hand to finish off the test subject. I did it. I conquered the wheel. After about 16 hours of runs and just a little bit of save scumming, I beat Slay the Spire 2 while letting a wheel pick my rewards and f up my events. This challenge, as drained as I felt towards the end, was incredibly fun. I really like Slay the Spire 2, and I couldn't think of any better way to mess up this game than to rip all control out of my hands and watch as the wheel burns my deck to the ground. But anyway, that's going to be it from me. I hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, thank you for watching.